So sweep picking or sweeping is a shredding technique that got quite popular by guitarists like Yngwie Malmsteen, Jason Becker. It's a technique that is used usually to play arpeggios. The name of the technique comes from the sweeping kind of movement. So basically with your right hand you are going down the strings in one smooth, controlled sweeping movement. So rather than play like each string in a separate movement, like right, so I had 3 down movements, you're making one movement. Okay, so the first thing we want to work on when we work on sweep picking is the muting technique, the left hand muting technique. So I'm also using the right hand to mute, but in general I'm just using it, I'm just kind of like putting it on top, my palm, on top of the strings that I'm not using. So in this case these are 3 strings patterns, so I'm just kind of laying my hand all the time, my palm, on the lower strings to prevent them from vibrating. So that's the easy part. And now the left hand muting is really where you need a lot of coordination. So how does it work? I'm taking the first pattern. Alright, so notice that after I play the 3rd string, I move to the 2nd string. Okay, and I lift the finger that was on the 3rd string. Not too much, because then the open string might vibrate, but just enough to stop the 3rd string from vibrating. Okay, so look at this finger. I'm doing it very slow. You see that it slightly moves up. And then when I move to the 1st string, the finger that's on the 2nd string slightly moves up. So that's how we mute the strings with the left hand. And of course the tricky thing is to do that in perfect coordination with the right hand. So at first, before you even try the actual sweeping movement, just try to do this with separate movements on the right hand, but just like focus first on the left hand. Oops. Alright, and after you have generated a certain momentum, a certain level of confidence with the left hand muting, you can start to add sweeping movement. So basically the sweeping movement, you can only do it when you reach a certain speed. Like when you're too slow, you simply cannot do it, because the whole thing is that it's like one movement. It's actually a little bit like strumming in a way when you play chords, but it's way more controlled, right? So it's one movement, but you still, first of all, you keep the palm sort of touching the upper strings or the bridge in order to get a good anchor for your hand. And it's yeah, so if we start with 3-string picking, we would just do something like this. Okay, so notice that as I go faster, the movement becomes one smooth, controlled movement. And that's to separate from 3 downstrokes, which would be... Look at my wrist. These are 3 separate movements, and this is one movement. Alright, so it takes time to really feel it. Once you feel it, you can start to do the whole pattern. Alright, in this specific example, the actual sweeping is only in the down stroke. So from the third string to the first string we do a sweeping movement, then we do an upstroke and a separate upstroke. So this is not a sweep. The going up in this particular example is not an up sweep. An up sweep would look like this. Okay, notice that as I go up it's also one smooth movement. Alright, but in this example, the 3-string sweeping, we only practice down sweeping. So this etude is called Lost Treasures. It's an original composition that I made. This is the kind of things that I would make up when I was a teenager and I wanted to master sweep picking or other shredding techniques. I would make up these kind of musical exercises, which makes the practicing a little bit more fun. So the etude itself contains the tabs for this piece and also backing tracks that you can play along with in 3 different speeds: slow, medium and fast. And also audio demonstration in slow and fast speeds, so you can just kind of like have a reference how it should sound like in the different speeds. And the way to go with it, it kind of like depends on your current level. If you're entirely new to sweep picking, then at first I would recommend that you just practice each pattern separately, each arpeggio separately, and only when you get to a certain speed, let's say around 80 beats per minute, work with a metronome, by the way, very important. I'll discuss it a little bit in a future video maybe, because this is something that often I see is very important to explain. So work with a metronome when you get to around 80 BPM in 3 notes per beat. Then you can start to combine the different arpeggios. So at first you can combine just the first 2, and then the second and third, the third and the fourth, and only then try all of them. Like, the tricky part is always the transition between the arpeggios. So you don't want to get stuck in this place where you're like right, you really want the transition to be smooth, so it's better to play the whole thing slower but be able to transition smoothly between the different arpeggios. That's a very good question. It really depends on your current level, and of course also how much time you're going to dedicate every day to practicing it. It does take time, I say this again. It's a tricky technique, it takes some time to get it properly, and my most important recommendation is to really take the time to get a clean sound slow. Because when you try to play it fast, too fast before you really owned and mastered the muting technique, then it's just going to sound messy. You know, that's where it's going to sound like this kind of things, and then you can say, yeah, I can play fast, but it actually doesn't really have this shreddy effect. It just sounds messy. So if you take your time and you work with a metronome and you work slow properly, it will be much easier to build speed, I promise you, after you have the slow, like after you have a very good foundation and you're able to play clean and in controlled movement slowly.